Well, I actually went to church the past couple of weeks. The youth were doing a program, and I usually go when they do that. And then the week before that, the new pastor was supposed to be here, and so I went to check him out, but he ended up not speaking, and another guy from the conference spoke. And his sermon for church was fine. It's the afternoon thing he did that really had me questioning some of the stuff he was saying. But it made me realize where people like Dwight Nelson are coming up with this whole Islam thing that they're all involved in. Now, some of you have watched all my videos. You know I had one on here about Dwight and his sermons titled "The Star Still Rising Over Islam," which just the title of that is insane. I'm sorry, the star never rose over Islam. But he got a lot of that from, he was quoting this guy named Darnell in that sermon. Well, this guy I went and heard a couple weeks ago also was talking about Darnell. And apparently they do feel that God was kind of leading the Muslims. See, Dwight, and not just Dwight, but apparently this movement in the Adventist church here with this Darnell guy that wrote the book, feel that they keep saying this, 9 of our 10 doctrines can be found in the Quran, or to see the very truth we believe in, is how Dwight said it, which is, of course, is insane, because first of all, the one they're missing is the main one, right? Salvation, a savior. Um, but they don't even have any of the others, not really. It's a far stretch, far stretch for them to try and say that even there's a seed of truth of the other things we believe in. For example, our understanding is state of the dead. Well, in the Quran it talks about some resurrection. They say, oh, see, they have this seed of truth. No, that's a far cry from what we know. I wouldn't even call that a seed of truth we have. But anyway, what I realized was that these men kind of have this view that the Quran is somehow maybe led by God. Muhammad was led as this was written, and so Muhammad was kind of a good guy. They don't come straight out and say he's a prophet, but if you're going to say he's a good guy and led by God, then you have to say he's a prophet, since that's what he claims. But it's a very strange way that they're viewing Muslims. Just almost like this is another branch that God is working through. And I asked a question, the guy kind of danced around it, but to me this is very strange for Adventists to get caught up in this, since we supposedly had an understanding of what the fifth trumpet was. I think there's other ways to approach this if you want to work with the Muslims, and that is not by thinking the Quran or that Muhammad was holy in some way, but to identify that, of course, there are going to be some things in the Quran that we can use to lead them to truth, because look, they're the descendants of Ishmael. Ishmael was taught by Abraham, so of course there is going to be certain things in there, such as they don't eat pork, so the dietary law. Different things that people that want to study this out and find things they can use, but to make a giant leap from looking for things you can use and saying, well, it somehow has some truth in there and God is with him, that's just insane. And so anyway, I took the video down, Dwight, because I'm going to redo this now that I know what's going on. But just the other thing I noticed being in church the past couple weeks is just how dark it is. I mean, people have lost the truth. Even the conservative, even the ones that really seem like they are searching, or they want to know what's right. They're just so confused with this whole new theology that has completely taken over the church. It's amazing to me. Some of the most conservative people still speak the new theology lingo sometimes when they're talking about different spiritual things, and they don't even know it. It really has come in and confused the minds of the members of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And so when I was thinking about this and thinking about how confused everybody seemed to be, it reminded me of something I wrote a long time ago. I mean, this is probably 15 years ago or more that I wrote this short story or parable, whatever you want to call it. And I titled this little story "The Boat." And I thought, I'm just going to read this. I'll record it as I'm reading it and put it on my channel. And hopefully you can get something out of it, and hopefully it will uh, help clarify or help your thinking when it comes to what the church really is. So here's a story titled The Boat. There once was a boat. It was a grand and glorious boat. The boat was designed perfectly, and the owner of the boat said that as long as you stayed in this boat, you would have a safe voyage and be welcomed into a land of plenty. Many got on this boat hoping to see the goodly land, and such a promise was assured, they knew, if they stayed on the boat. Indeed, many were happy with the boat and in praise of the owner at the beginning of the voyage. But since it was a long trip, people started to forget. They forgot that the boat was perfectly designed and would ensure a safe arrival to their destination just the way it was built. Thinking they could do better than the original designer, they started to change things. Someone decided they could get there faster if they had a different motor. Now that sounds good to most, a bigger engine, more horsepower, more speed. But a few, some that still remembered, counseled to keep the same motor provided. They of course were outvoted, and if in position of power, they soon lost their positions by cunning men, and eventually laughed to scorn. So they get a different motor. And you know what? The boat does pick up speed. Why, it seems like a great decision. Even some of those that voted against it now agree it was a good thing. The speed is so great that many more passengers have decided to get on, thinking to get to the land of plenty even quicker. Now, there were rules about new passengers, rules that the original designer had set in place. They were to be told about the boat and who started it and how it was designed. And of course they were told somewhat. But they were shown the new design, not the original. So they had no knowledge whatsoever about the original motor. As time went on, there was another committee meeting. Now most of those that had recommended against the new motor were not on the committee, unless of course they had seen the errors of their ways and were talking about how they were wrong and the boat was much better now with the new motor. Why, some of those were promoted to high-ranking positions. Well, this new meeting was about the hull. Yes, it was discussed. A new hull will have us sailing right along, and of course any naysayers were pooh-poohed with a reminder about how well the new motor is working. The vote was cast and a new hull it was. And once again, although fewer in number this time, there were those that warned and counseled that the owner would want the original design and such a thing as this should not happen. But their remarks were not welcomed and quickly dismissed. It wasn't long before various other things were changed as well. Why, they had new rigging, new lifeboats, new colors, and a new front piece. Three angels was just too confrontational and old-fashioned, you know. So they just had an emblem of stripes. Stripes were the rage. Why, just look at the biggest boat in the sea. It had stripes and other symbols all over it. So they had knew this and knew that. Now, many people liked this new design. You see, it was familiar to them, being similar to the boats they were already on, so it was not a great thing for them to switch. Indeed, so many switched that the boat was getting quite loaded. Why, it was so full that it was one of the most populated boats sailing those seas. By now, the naysayers were few in number, and even most of those didn't remember the original design anymore, so they were not even sure what to naysay about, except that the boat was starting to look like many others, and they knew it shouldn't be so. But just naysaying about that didn't really help much. Actually, it just caused greater confusion in the minds of the new people. And the new passengers? Why, at every stop the design was so different, they all looked at the boat from how it was when they got on, and so didn't agree about much except that it was a grand old boat, and they were glad to be part of something that would guarantee their safe voyage to the land of plenty. Now one day there came a big and grand meeting of sorts, the kind that dwarfs all previous such meetings, yet the one that can only come about because of the ones before it. They discussed many things at this meeting, but one thing under consideration was what to do with the naysayers. Some thought they should be cast off at the next port. Others didn't want to wait till then. Eventually they decided that as long as the naysayers had no position and no voice, they could stay on the boat and tag along, but if they continued to speak out, then such would be cast off immediately. And while that was a momentous decision itself, the really big one was the one they made after that. The rudder. It had been argued that the rudder was not taking them where they wanted to go, so they wanted a new one. Why, they thought the original owner must not have known what he was doing to send them this way, and they could get there faster with the new rudder. So it was voted and passed without so much as a boo. So at the next port a new rudder was on, and the passengers never even knew it. All they knew was that it was a grand old boat that guaranteed their safety and quick voyage to the land of plenty. Why, pretty soon they had parties and celebrations the likes you've never seen. And by now many of the naysayers had either gotten off or been cast off, or naysayed about pretty much nothing except a celebration or two, which was easily dismissed. A grand fairyland on water boat was becoming. They even had captains from other boats come over and take the helm for a while to see how they did. Even the captain from the biggest boat came and became friends with this boat, which was quite interesting since they had been enemies before. Why, the whole sea started loving this boat. So many got on board that it was enlarged to accommodate all the extra baggage. Now, by and by, some new people got on a boat that couldn't figure out why the boat and those that were on it were so very different than what they had expected. For they had heard tell of whose boat this was, and they had seen something of the original design in some old books they had found. So they started checking things out. At first, everybody loved these new people that were so curious about the boat and were asking lots of questions. They invited them to be right proper leaders and teachers and gave them access to places others did not have. And that is, of course, what started the beginning of the end. These new people caused quite a stir when in the hold of the ship they found the original design blueprints. They saw the beauty in the original design and thought that the others would like to know what they had found. Now these were not like the naysayers of the past, who had come on the boat and seen the changes firsthand. These had only discovered it in the blueprint and yet believed just as much, nay, more than even the original naysayers. It was as if a spirit was guiding them to proclaim the original design and its intent and point out the error in changing. And they weren't like the few naysayers that were still on there, naysaying about much of nothing save a celebration or two. No, these were different. Why, they knew whole structural changes needed to be made. Changes that would very likely rip the boat in two, and cause many that were not stable to lose their footing and fall overboard. This did raise quite a stir before they could be taken care of, and taken care of they were. Some were thrown overboard, others left off at ports. But the boat was different now. The new naysayers had left an impression, and even though they keep them off the boat, they stand and continue to teach at the ports and even at sea. Why, some of the people they influenced joined the boat only to eventually get thrown off themselves. So a new meeting is called. It is decided that not only should the new naysayers be thrown off, but they should be cast into prison so as to stop their naysaying fanaticism and be a warning to others. Why, just a bunch of offshoots they are anyway. So vote taken and passed, quick as can be. Lawyer hired and some in jail. Let that be a lesson to the rest of those to tell. Well, the naysayers had nothing left to do but to have small boats here and there of their own. They make the design to closely resemble the original of the big boat, checking the blueprint from time to time to see how they are doing. They keep watching and praying that the big boat will get back to the original design, but instead it seems to be drifting farther away all the time. One day they noticed that the design of the big boat has changed some more. There is a new flag and some people were seen dancing around it. Some also see that the big boat has a new captain, and he appears as an angel of light. Every once in a while, some jump from the big boat and start to swim to the smaller boats. But the jeering and jesting and being told that sure destruction will come to any that jump ship becomes so loud and serious sounding that it causes quite a few to turn and swim back to the big boat, which of course causes those on the big boat to ridicule the little boats to scorn for being so few in number. Days turn into years, and as the sun starts to rise for the last time, the little boats pull into the long looked-for harbor. The big boat never does complete the voyage. It took on too much of the sea, and ended up opposite where it should be. So when the owner came and demanded of his boat, he was quite upset to see that the enemy had it, and that it wasn't where it should be. So he consigned both to hell. Now many on a big boat complained loudly about that, and said that he had promised as long as they stayed on the boat they would be welcomed in. He was quite stunned, and said, "But this is not the boat I designed. I do not recognize this boat at all. These little boats, why, they are just like what I designed." And so he welcomed the little boats in with everlasting arms forever and ever, and cut the big boat asunder. Which boat do you intend to be on?